In the last video, we recorded setting up the asset record for an asset that we have just purchased. And now we want to record the actual purchase of the asset. There are plenty of training documents and training videos on all of the scenarios that go into purchasing fixed assets. We're going to put a copy of those videos and training documents in the folder that contains this video so you can really research those and learn about all the different scenarios. But I would say that 90% of all of the fixed assets that are purchased in the Adventist world are being bought out of operating funds. And so the money and the bank account that is buying the asset is over in the operating fund, but our accounting manual has us recording the fixed asset over in the plan fund, Fund 20. Essentially what we are doing, and maybe this is an oversimplistic way to explain it, essentially what we're doing is that we're buying the asset in the operating fund and simultaneously transferring it into the plan fund. Another way that you could look at it is that we are simultaneously giving the money to the plan fund and they are simultaneously buying the asset and it's in the plan fund. It doesn't matter. Basically, from the operating fund's perspective, we're paying out money and the wealth is being transferred to the plan fund, and from the plan fund's perspective, it's got the asset being transferred in and it's got to record the asset. That's the entry that we're going to do today, where the operating fund is buying the asset for the plan fund. We're not spending restricted money, we're not spending allocated money, we're simply buying an asset in the operating fund and we need to get it over into plan fund. We'll go to our ledger entry here. For our class purposes, I'm just going to make this as a JV. This is the version 6 ledger entry screen. You want to populate the transaction reference using your conventional way for transaction reference. So our transaction date, bought this on 2001/2013. We're going to do this in the first period of 2013. I'm doing the debit first. The first line of this entry is a transfer out. This is the operating fund, which is going to be a transfer out and a credit to cash. We're taking the resources and basically giving the value over to the plant fund. Let's go find that transfer account right here. This is now talking about the funds, the money in the operating fund that was spent to buy the laptop. We're not talking about fund function restriction for the laptop. We're talking about the fund function restriction for the money it was spent. So the money is in Fund 10, likely to be unallocated non-tithe, but it could have been money being spent out of the AFC or AFOs. That would work just fine. The function is the department. What was the department that was spending the money? That was Treasury. And what was the restriction of the money being spent? Oh, well, that was unrestricted money. And so these decisions that I just made would all be flexible depending on the circumstance. The resource, function, and restriction would all be flexible depending on the circumstance of the money being spent on the asset you're buying. I like doing the flag first, and this is a transfer out. If we're doing a transfer out, where are we transferring it out to? We're transferring it out to Fund 20. And so we have an out going to Fund 20. Anytime you do a transfer, you've got to capture the flag, whether it's an in or out, and the other side of the transfer is where did it go to. And we'll do this for 2,500. And this is a debit, since this is a transfer out description, and we're ready for a new line. And now we've got to do the payment. This is the actual check going out. It's in Fund 10. We wouldn't want purchase of laptop in our checkbook. In our checkbook, we want something like Case Computer Company, 2,500, and that's a credit. And now we've got a balanced entry here. I like to do them all as one entry. So we've taken care of Fund 10, transferring the money out over to the plant fund, and now we need to have the money or the asset being transferred over, and now we've got to record the things going on in Fund 20 in the plant fund. And so now we want to make sure that we are clear now that we're making these entries in Fund 20. For the sake of clarity, let's go ahead and record the transfer in now. Remember, for every transfer out, you've got to have a transfer in. Go to the same transfer account. That's that transfer between funds account. Now we are talking about the attributes of the asset. Earlier we're talking about the attribute of the money being spent. Now we're talking about the attribute of the asset. We have the resource, and so that is our unallocated investment in plant resources. Over on the plant fund, anytime we're going to have a debit or credit to a fixed asset, the corresponding part of that entry has to be to UFIN to make everything work right. Function, at this point, it'd be very reasonable to not do treasurer because the treasurer is not getting this over there, so it's very reasonable here to have a general institutional, some sort of general overhead account. The asset is not coming to the treasurer. He was the one that bought it. If you wanted to put it to treasurer, you could. And for sure, our fixed asset are not talked about in terms of restriction. So it's unrestricted 0, and the flag, this is coming in. The other one was going out. This is coming in. And where did it come from? It came from Fund 10. And it's 2,500. It's a credit. We're all set for the next line. This was a transfer in of value. We're recording something like recording revenue. And what was the fund function restriction of that revenue? And then we go to a new line. This one is the exciting part for our purposes. This is the actual recording of the asset. 205, Fund 20. We've got the 2,500, and that's a debit. We've got a description. Remember, every description needs to make sense in the context of the account it is being posted to. I believe we're all set. Before we do the next little bit, let's take a little peek at our grid view so you can see what we have. So you can see we've got Fund 10 and Fund 20 entry. We have debit and credit, credit and debit. So we have a transfer debit, a transfer credit. We have an in and an out. It's coming in from Fund 10. It's going out to Fund 20. We're all set. Got the asset here, the line here. This is the debit to the fixed asset. Here is the part that is unusual for our fixed asset purchase. And so we go over to fixed asset. At this point, we have already set up the asset over in the asset register. If you got to this point and you haven't, you can click the little button here and set it up on the fly. So when you get really good, you just set it up on the fly all the time. But the logic of the program is that you set it up before you start doing the ledger entry. And so now you've jotted it on a piece of paper or something of that sort, but you go E here and you go and find the asset that you previously have set up. We have bought one of them. Now this asset quantity is very valuable if you're buying a bulk of one thing, folding chairs. So you buy 30 folding chairs and you set up one asset register and record 30 folding chairs. And then you manage those folding chairs almost like an inventory item. You can dispose of just some of them if you lose them or they break, or you can buy some more and add to it. And then this asset indicator is very important right here. You've got 4 values that you can use. The first item you record on an asset, call it initial, and then all of the rest of the purchases connected to the asset use asset value. In our case here, we would use initial, but let's say we wanted to record the shipping that came in a separate bill. We would write the entry, tag the asset, but now code that shipping as asset value. Or suppose they came into 2 or 3 parts. You bought one part from one company, one part of the asset from one, and one part of the other asset from another. So whatever is the first one that's recorded is coded as initial, and all the rest are coded as asset value. That way the automatic depreciation entry will combine them all together and make one entry just for the depreciation. And so let's go back over to our deal here. We have it all set up and we're ready to post. We can go over now to show that we're accomplishing something. We go over to the asset record that we just created, and you can see that we're now building a value here for the balance of that asset record. As we now show that we have spent $2,500 on it and we haven't any depreciation. So the next video will be about making depreciation, and at the end of that video we'll come back over and you see that, oh, we've depreciated a little bit. So stay tuned for the next video, and I'm hoping that this is beneficial and enjoyable to you.